Hello, this is Elizabeth Griffis, and I am presenting my proposal called Teacher Perceptions of Best Practices in Math RTI Instruction. The purpose of this study will be to identify teacher perceptions of best practices for math RTI instruction for grades K-6. And then it's also to develop a toolkit of instructional strategies for teachers new to math RTI instruction for grades K-6. I've found, I've been working in RTI for a couple of years now, and oftentimes teachers who are asked to teach RTI small groups are not necessarily trained or experienced enough to know what strategies to pull for instruction. So I'd like to look at the results of teacher perceptions of best practices and see if I can develop a list of strategies that new teachers to Math RTI can pull from to make their jobs a little easier. I also think that they will definitely need some support from school leaders on these toolkits. So, all right, now the major findings that I've looked at in the literature so far. Research in secondary math RTI is limited. A lot of it is focused in elementary grades instead. So there are a lot of options for instruction for elementary schools, but not as much for secondary and middle schools. So definitely teachers need professional development, especially if they have fewer options. I've also researched some best practices in RTI. The articles that I've found, they often discuss the general framework, how in RTI you have to have a baseline assessment, you have tiers, multiple tiers of instruction, you have progress monitoring, those kinds of things I've found they've discussed as part of a general framework. It's less about specific instructional strategies, but there are some of those. But what I found is one article, Petricone 2020, discussed how RTI is messier in middle grades. Schedules are different. The way scheduling is set up is different. Students have multiple teachers for different subjects. Sometimes it's harder to schedule RTI time. So it's a little bit messier in middle grades than it is typically in elementary grades. So that's a bit of a challenge in middle school when it comes to RTI instruction and planning. My research question, this is a qualitative study. My question is, what are teacher perceptions of best practices for RTI math instruction in a rural Appalachian middle school? So the school that I'll be focusing on is Sevierville Middle School in Sevier County School District. And this is a school that it's rural and it's an Appalachian area. And this is the school where I work. So I've seen that we can use some improvement in math instruction and for RTI. And I'm really interested in teacher perceptions on what are some of the best practices. My theoretical framework is constructivism. And constructivism, this is the theory that talks about how people construct their own meaning through experiences. And that's the learning, how students learn. So with RTI, RTI offers a great chance for instructors to provide students with those experiences so that they can construct their own meaning. Students who come to RTI are often struggling and they may have some learning gaps. And what's nice about RTI is it has the small groups so students can really, they have this opportunity for some hands-on experiences to really construct their own meaning and kind of fill in their gaps that way. My conceptual framework is pretty basic. It's just the general guideline for the Sevier County School District when it comes to RTI. So this is the basic framework for RTI in this district. This discusses the types of testing that we do and the tier system and the size of small groups, how progress monitoring should be conducted, and how decisions should be made. So this is just the basic framework for how RTI works in this school district. My approach is going to be phenomenological. So this is a phenomenological study, and those studies seek to determine the essence of a particular experience from the perspective of participants. So since my research question asks about teacher perceptions, I'm looking for the teacher perceptions of best instructional practices for RTA math. So I'm hoping to get an idea of where our RTI teachers, RTI math teachers in this school are when it comes to best practices. What are they thinking about? What are the best things to do to instruct students? So that's what I'm looking for here. The participants in this study are math RTI teachers and school and district leaders from the Sevier County School District. So basically my participants are following the forms of data I'm collecting. So the first form of data I'm going to be collecting is a survey. And these are going to be participants from around the district. So this is going to be my largest number of participants who take the survey. I'm going to be asking RTI teachers who teach RTI math in middle grades from around the district to complete this survey. And I'm going to ask the district leader for RTI to share this survey with them. So hopefully I can get some good feedback from these teachers in the survey. My second form of data is going to be the interview, and here teachers from one middle school will be interviewed. This will be Sevierville Middle School. I'm going to interview the math RTI teachers, and so this will be a much smaller number of participants here. So this would probably be about 3 or 4 participants. I'm also going to be interviewing the school leader who is in charge of RTI at Sevierville Middle School, as well as the district leader in charge of RTI for the whole district. So I'll be interviewing them as well. And then finally, this small group of teachers, I will also be collecting artifacts and conducting observations on an as-needed basis based on their responses in the interview. And to go into a little more detail, these are my forms of qualitative data. I'm hoping to have 4 total, beginning with the survey. So the survey will be conducted first. I'm going to be asking questions about best practices for math RTI instruction, and I'm hoping to gain information to inform my interview questions. I'm looking for teacher perceptions from around the district and then focusing those more when it comes to the interviews. And I will be asking just that smaller number of teachers more in-depth questions about best practices for instruction. And then based on what we discuss in the interviews, I'm going to have my next 2 forms of qualitative data. So for example, if a teacher describes a specific strategy that they've used, I might want to go in and observe them using that strategy in class. Or perhaps they have a specific tool that they've used or something that might be used as an artifact. I would like to collect that artifact to use as part of my research. So I'm hoping to have all 4 of these forms of data as I conduct this study. In the data analysis, I will be reducing information to themes via open coding, axial coding, and then finally selective coding. Here are, for my survey, I will be conducting this survey using a Google form. So with the Google form, I can automatically see the responses on a Google Sheet. So that will make it a lot easier for me to get an idea of the results of the survey. The interview questions will be created based on those survey results. And then I'll conduct those interviews in person. Those will be recorded and I will transcribe those so that I can study those transcriptions and then code them. I plan to use color coding as I go through the coding process. And I might use some of the techniques that we've discussed as I've seen some people's examples of data analysis. So I might cut some of the pieces apart and move them around on a table so that I can start to see emerging themes that way. And then finally, artifacts and observations will be collected to support the interview accounts. So these will just add to the richness of the data that I collect. As far as trustworthiness techniques, I have a few that I plan to use. Of course, triangulation is one that will add to the credibility and confirmability of this research. Member checking is another one that will add to credibility that I plan to use. I'm hoping to have a sufficiently thick description of the context, along with the interview responses, artifacts, and observations. And then as I write about all of these experiences and these results, I'm hoping to have lots of rich descriptive data to show the results. I also plan to use an audit trail, so I plan to be as detailed as possible in keeping track of my entire research process and how I conducted all of this research, so that I can that can add to the dependability. And then the peer debriefer, I'm going to have someone debrief and read over my process, so that will add to the dependability and confirmability of this research. Finally, as far as ethical considerations, I do plan on using informed consent statements for all of the participants so that they know what they're getting into. Some other techniques for protecting participants, really the big one is I plan on keeping them all anonymous, whether in surveys or interviews. I don't plan on using anyone's names. I'll probably label them with letters instead. And I plan on keeping any identifying information restricted. So I'll just keep them as anonymous as possible, and their names will not be used in this study. So that's all I have for this research proposal. Thank you for listening. And if you have any questions about this research, please let me know. And that's it. Thank you.